Teresa Tomeo and Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders starts now.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping you?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Tuesday edition of Call to Communion. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. And hey, if that is you, we would love to hear from you. Perhaps you have a question or two about the Catholic faith, something that has been eluding you for a while. You're just trying to figure things out. Why does the Catholic Church teach what it does? And why do we stick to things and not really, shift around with the shifting sands as sometimes you see happening? No, we are here. We are here for you. And so here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening outside of North America, please dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. Again, that phone number, 833-288-EWTN. We have the A-team in place, ready to tackle those questions. Charles Beery is our producer, Ryan Penny is our phone screener, and Jeff Burson is on social media. He'll be glad to pass along any questions that you might want to pose via YouTube or Facebook. There's always the possibility of, adding your comments there via those streaming platforms. We are live there right now, as well as on the radio. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom Price, how are you today?
Fantastic. Had one of my favorite lunches. I think it was beef and lamb shawarma from a local Mediterranean restaurant, and so I'm a happy camper.
Aren't you just the meatitarian today?
Apparently I am. And you vegged out like crazy for your lunch?
Well, and I'm suffering from an excess of cayenne and jalapeno pepper right now. So
but you are smiling.
If you hear flames coming out of the microphone, you know why.
Got it. Well, let's answer a couple of emails if we can while we're getting these phone calls screened. Here's one from David. I understand that the New Testament Gospels were included in the Bible for a good theological reason. Nevertheless, other texts were left out, probably because they were fragmented or did not contribute to a coherent narrative of Jesus. So would Orthodox Catholicism regard the reading of such Gospels, for instance, the Gospel of Thomas, as heresy? Secondly, do you think that reading non-canonical scripture adds to our understanding of Jesus? Thanks, David.
Thanks. I appreciate the question. So I think that you have misunderstood the reason behind the inclusion of texts within the canonical scriptures.
Okay.
The church didn't cast around for literature about Jesus and then pick books that had the most coherent narratives and say, these have coherent narratives, therefore we should read them. Lots of books in the New Testament and the Old don't have coherent narratives. That's not the reason for their inclusion. The reason that they are included is because of the Church's judgment that these books were inspired by God, whether they have coherent narratives or not. And the canonical Gospels are traditionally understood as having come down to us from the apostles. If you would like to read a book that makes a strong case for the apostolic authorship of the canonical Gospels, I recommend Brant Petree's book, The Case for Jesus. Very good book on that topic,
okay.
and several others as well. So that's the reason they were included. And, in point of fact, the Gospels themselves are not really written in the style of your sort of standard biography. The majority of the Gospels, or a serious chunk of them, deal with the last week of Jesus' life, right? So they really highlight the centrality of his teaching and then of his death and resurrection. So not your typical biography. And in fact, at points, they're difficult to harmonize with one another. And so the note of coherence is not the most important one. inspiration and apostolic authority is the most important thing. Now, do I think is it necessarily bad to read non-canonical literature from the first century, and would it contribute to our knowledge of Christ? This is just me. I never tell anybody don't read something. I mean, except like pornography, right? Something that's like inherently, intrinsically going to orient you towards evil. You stay away from that.
Sure.
But I mean, I read personally stuff from I read atheist philosophers. I read scientists. I read non-Christian religious texts, because it's all part of the world. Like atheists live in the world. I want to understand atheists, so I'm going to read their stuff. Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, Jews live in the world. They're my neighbors. I want to know what they think, so I read their stuff.
But you may not be the average bear here.
I'm not the average bear. And second century Gnostic nut jobs are part of the world. And they conditioned the way the church responded to Gnostic nut jobs. And so I want to know what they thought. So I will read second century non-canonical heretical texts to understand the context in which the church was acting and the kinds of errors that it was repudiating.
I see.
Do those texts give you accurate information about Jesus? Absolutely not. No way. I mean, a lot of these things are completely fanciful constructions, composed post hoc, right, to justify really bizarre heretical interpretations of Jesus that are founded neither in the historical Christ nor the teaching of the Catholic Church, nor in sacred tradition that's been handed down for 2,000 years. So you're not going to gain insight into Jesus and what he thought and did. What you are going to gain is insight into the mind of these merely human authors who hijacked the name of Jesus for their own polemical and rhetorical purposes.
So I guess the thing to keep in mind, if you are going to, stick your toe into that kind of water, is to keep in mind there's a reason why these were not included in the Bible, let's say. To keep all that in mind.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Before you even pick it up.
Sure. It's like if you pick up a modern text by somebody that claims that Jesus was a space alien from Alpha Centauri, because they like space aliens and they're trying to find a way to sacralize their ideology, and so they attach Jesus to it. It's about that accurate.
Okay, very good. David, thank you so much for your email. And if you'd like to send us an email for a future show, the address ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Very soon we'll be recording another one of those mailbag programs where we'll take care of a whole passel of emails. Looking forward to that. In a moment here, we'll be talking with Cindy in Portland, Oregon, listening on Mater Dei Radio. We've got 2 lines open right now. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, call now, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
Part of the success we've had on the world over, I attribute to certainly my relationship with Mother Angelica and her teaching me early on that when you sit with someone, you talk to them, you share with them, and you create an environment where they will tell you things they wouldn't tell anyone else.
The World Over with Raymond Arroyo, Thursday night, 8 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
It's time for Family Man with Dr. Gregory Popchak.
Anxiety disorders affect 20% of Americans, and many take anti-anxiety medications in an attempt to find relief. But surprisingly, a new study from the University of New Zealand examining the effectiveness of different types of anxiety therapies found that compared with using medication alone to treat anxiety, or even medication combined with therapy, anxious patients who received cognitive behavior therapy alone experienced the most relief of all 3 groups. The study found that anxious patients can tend to lean too heavily on medication to help them feel calm, and because of that, can struggle to develop the skills therapy could otherwise afford them. By contrast, patients who received counseling alone worked harder to learn skills that help them create a more peaceful life. If you're suffering from anxiety but not currently receiving counseling, contact a faithful therapist who can make sure you're getting the best care possible. I'm Dr. Greg Popchak, but you can call me Family Man.
To discover more ways faith can enrich your life, visit CatholicCounselors.com.
Got to tell you, around here, our gas in the tank is the holy sacrifice of the Mass. We broadcast it every day from Our Lady of the Angels Chapel right here on the EWTN campus, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. So please join us tomorrow morning and every morning for the holy sacrifice of the Mass right here on EWTN radio and television. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Cindy in Portland, listening on Mater Dei Radio. She's a first-time caller. Hey, Cindy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, love your show.
Thank you.
So I'm a cradle Episcopalian, looking at becoming Roman Catholic. Have been, doing a lot of reading, watching EWTN, all that kind of thing for the last 6 months. Mm-hmm. So I went to our local priest, and we discussed things, and then I told him that I belong to several Masonic organizations. And he said, "Oh, you're going to have to denounce those." And I said, "What?" Anyway, so I want to know why. Nobody will quite tell me why I can't become a Roman Catholic because I belong to Order of Eastern Star and Order of Amaranth.
Okay, thanks. I can help you with that. And also, I'm going to point you to a document from the Holy See. Has the subtitle "Irreconcilability Between the Christian Faith and Freemasonry." So you can probably find at the Vatican website. You can probably find that fairly easily.
Sure.
That's a short document. There are many more works that you could, books and so forth on this topic that elaborate, but that's an official one from the Holy See. Here it goes down to this: in Origins, the Masonic Lodge was founded upon deistic principles and the philosophical tenet of indifferentism. And I remember when I was a kid, I went and toured the Masonic Lodge in the Grand Lodge in Philadelphia, and I remember the tour guide actually making specific reference to those doctrines. And the necessity of the belief in a God didn't quite matter which one you believed in, and made a big deal out of the fact that they were indifferent as to the form that religion would take and so forth. And again, in Origin, the Masonic Lodge has always, or historically, been set in contrast to the Catholic faith and has worked for the diminishment of Catholic influence in civil society. It is not a mistake. It's not an accident. If you look at the locations of historic Masonic buildings in the United States, they're often in close proximity to Catholic churches and houses of formation. So in my own state of Alabama, for instance, we used to be part of the Diocese of Mobile. Mobile's got a beautiful cathedral. You go down to the Mobile Cathedral, right down the block, great big Masonic Lodge. That's not an accident. Not an accident. If you go to St. Louis, Missouri, the Rome of the West, as they call it, great Catholic city, St. Louis, Missouri, you're going to find a big Masonic Lodge right there, like about a block down from Jesuit Hall, right, smack dab almost on the campus of St. Louis University. Mm-hmm. Not an accident. Not an accident. And so, it's kind of like saying, you might say, well, look, Masons, I don't know, they're not actively persecuting the Catholic Church or trying to destroy its influence in civil society. I'm not going to name names because I don't want to be inflammatory, right? But think about ideologies that were radically opposed to, say, a particular religion and had widespread social influence and planted institutions all around the place and did a lot of harm to those religions and to practitioners thereof. And, 80 years later saying, well, today we're not really out to destroy all those people. But our founders were, and our institutions were, and our founding documents, which remain unchanged, still state those principles. You can see how that would be problematic, right? And that's the idea that the doctrines of Freemasonry and the historic practice of the organization was intentionally anti-Catholic. And they haven't changed that, right? It's just because the disposition of some individual Masons may be benevolent, the organization as such has always been expressly and intentionally anti-Catholic. And so there's no reason, right? I mean, if one wants fellowship or the opportunity to be engaged in works of social justice or charity, you can scratch that itch as a Catholic. Right? There's no reason to have loyalty to the Masonic organization as such right, which is historically constructed to oppose Catholic influence in civil life, no reason to do that, unless or until the Masonic Lodge, in a formal public way, changes its constitutions, restates its principles, and renounces its historic opposition to Catholicism.
Okay. Cindy, is that helpful for you?
Very.
Okay.
Thank you. I just couldn't get a straight answer from anybody.
No, I understand.
Everybody was kind of, so anyway. No, that was very helpful.
Very
you.
good.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, we do try to give those straight answers, don't we? Yep. Thank you so much for your call, Cindy. That opens up a line for you now, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. It's called to communion here on EWTN. Roberta is listening in Abilene, Texas, beautiful part of our country, on Sirius XM 130. Roberta, what's on your mind today?
Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
We have some friends that are Lutheran, and we got into a discussion the other night, and he is adamant that the Lutherans believe in transubstantiation, and as a result, they are the only religion outside of Catholicism that is allowed to take the Eucharist at our Mass. And I find that inherently wrong, but I would like some way to back up that argument.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So, first of all, I would point you to the Lutherans' own declarations of faith. Look at the Book of Concord of the Augsburg Confession. And the Lutheran Church has always rejected explicitly the doctrine of transubstantiation, but not the doctrine of the real presence. We have to distinguish. Catholics and Lutherans alike both believe that Christ is substantially present in the Eucharist. We disagree on how that happens. Catholics believe that it happens by the change of bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. Lutherans believe that there is an addition, right? That you have bread and wine and they stay bread and wine, but the body and blood of Christ come along for the ride, so to speak. And there's a technical term that's been assigned to that position called consubstantiation. You have the substance of bread and wine and the substance of Christ's body and blood. But there's a lot more to say about the difference between Lutheran and Catholic understanding of the Eucharist than simply the mode of Christ's presence. The most important difference is not to do with the doctrine of the real presence, in my judgment, but the sacrifice of the Mass. The Catholic Church teaches as a dogmatic fact that the Mass is a sacrifice, a distinct oblation, a propitiatory sacrifice offered to God in reparation for the sins of the world, and the principal means whereby we receive the graces of Christ's death on Calvary. The Lutheran Church radically, expressly, and vehemently denies that doctrine. And Luther called the Mass the greatest blasphemy. And along with their rejection of the sacrifice of the Mass, the Lutheran Church also rejects the sacrament of holy orders, and thus the entire architecture of the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
So it may be true that Lutherans believe in the doctrine of the real presence. It does not follow that they, in fact, have the real presence.
Well, yeah.
And they don't. From the Catholic understanding, by eliminating the sacrament of holy orders, Lutherans lost apostolic succession. They lost validly ordained priests who have the power given to them by Christ to confect the Eucharist. So they don't believe in the Mass, and they don't have the Mass, and whether or not they believe in the real presence, they ain't got it.
Yeah.
All right? And finally, belief in the real presence is not sufficient to licitly receive Holy Communion. All Catholics presumably believe in transubstantiation and the Mass and the whole kit and caboodle. That doesn't mean that all Catholics can receive communion. No Catholic in the state of mortal sin should receive communion. Lots of people believe the truth and can't receive communion. It's not enough to believe the truth. You have to be properly disposed. And one of the principal ways in which we're properly disposed is to be united in Catholic unity with the See of Peter.
Yeah.
And if you're not properly joined in unity to the universal church, you shouldn't receive communion. Now, the only exception to that, and it's not really an exception, is the Orthodox Christians are permitted under Catholic canon law to receive some of the sacraments of the church, because while there is division, the union of the Orthodox with the Catholics is much closer than that of Catholics with Lutherans.
Okay. And we do thank you for your call, Roberta. That's bringing us to, let's see, 833-288-EWTN, our phone number, 833-288-3986. We're going to get to Nikki in Portland in just a moment and Marilyn in Ann Arbor. But I want to stay on this topic of Lutheranism. Mary in Long Valley, South Dakota on Real Presence Radio just chimed in here. Mary says, does the Catholic Church's joint declaration on justification with the Lutherans contradict the Council of Trent? What are we talking about there?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And that declaration is the most misused Vatican statement, like, since the See of Peter, in my judgment. Yes.
Wow.
It's a great statement insofar as it stands, but it has been misapplied, misunderstood, misinterpreted, and misused from the get-go. What the joint declaration between Catholics and Lutherans says is, here are the things we agree on. That's what it says. Here's what we agree on. They deliberately prescind from, do not discuss, put to one side, all of those things that Lutherans and Catholics disagree about. Because the point of the doctrine, the point of the document, was to try to find some common ground with Lutherans. We've had 400 years of finding differences, right? We know what the differences are.
We know what those are.
We're going to try to say, here are some points of commonality. Now, the way it's been interpreted very badly, and by some people very highly placed in the church, is to say, see, we don't disagree on anything. Never says that. Mm-hmm. Never says that at all. We disagree radically on some very important questions, very substantive questions about the nature of salvation.
Fundamental questions.
And for what it's worth, when I was in the Protestant camp, before I became Catholic, I studied with some very good Protestant theologians, and they hated these ecumenical statements with Catholics for exactly that reason, right? They said, they're not dealing with the points of difference. They have to address the points of difference. This is a kind of subterfuge to pull the wool over people. That's how they saw it, right? Mm-hmm. And to take an analogous statement, the Evangelicals and Catholics Together affirmation, which was not between Lutherans and Catholics, but between Evangelicals and Catholics, that affirmed all these points of commonality and one another as brothers in the Lord. I was in seminary when that came out. My Protestant seminary professors, they hated that thing. I mean, it was like, public conflagration, with that business. And I said to one of my professors, well, why did the Protestants sign it? I kid you not, his response, they got snookered. That was his answer, right?
Really?
These cunning, sneaky Catholics, right, are trying to pull the wool over our eyes and make us think there are no differences. So that was the point of view. Yeah, no. Council of Trent still stands. Can't change that. That's infallible dogma of the Church. Lutheran doctrinal justification just simply says, here's what we agree on. We both agree the earth's round, too.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Mary, thanks so much for your question there via text, and glad you're listening to Real Presence Radio. Call to communion on EWTN, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Nikki is in Portland, also listening on Modern Day Radio, first-time caller. Nikki, what's on your mind today?
So I'm a Protestant. Mm-hmm. And I want to worship Mary because, she does amazing things. Why can't we worship her?
Oh, okay. Thanks. All depends on what you mean by the word worship. All depends on what you mean by the word worship. So if by worship you mean honor, venerate, imprecate, make appeals to, seek the intercession of, displays, public and interior, of deference, these kinds of things, these sorts of gestures and movements of the soul, then fine. And in fact, there was a Catholic theologian in the 19th century, Orestes Brownson, American theologian, who actually wrote a book one time called The Worship of the Saints. And similarly, in the Anglican marriage liturgy, the word worship is used in this way when the spouses say to one another, "With my body I thee worship." All right, and that's the sense in which the word is used. And the same way it's used in English common law when you speak of the judge as, or some venerable person as worshipful so and so. Or I pray the court, that language of prayer. That's what I was thinking of, not worship. If, however, by worship you mean to honor as a god to whom sacrifice is due, then it is entirely unlawful to worship Mary or any of the saints. We offer sacrifice and the duty of adoration to God alone.
Okay. That's where we're going to leave it. Nikki, thank you so much for your call. We do appreciate it. In a moment, we'll be talking with Marilyn in Ann Arbor, Michigan, listening on the great Ave Maria radio. Looks like we've got sold-out phones at the moment. When a line does become available, here is the number. You may want to write it down, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986, or you can text the letters EWTN to 55000. All right, back in a moment here with Marilyn from Ann Arbor in just a few moments on EWTN's Call to Communion. Stay with us.
Raymond Arroyo.
We need EWTN radio for the reason that Mother Angelica founded this enterprise. She saw this as a holistic approach, reaching the whole person, bringing them truth and life.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN radio.
Have you heard who's reading the register? Why, it's Matthew Bunson.
The National Catholic Register is that rarest of institutions in Catholic media, striving always to be faithful, orthodox, timely, and dedicated to journalistic excellence. Catholics know they can always depend on the Register for the news they need to know from an authentically Catholic perspective.
For a 3-month free subscription to the National Catholic Register, go to ncregister.com and click on the 3 months free banner.
Father Benedict Rochelle.
Brothers and sisters, we got to tell the truth in this country. For heaven's sakes, I wouldn't want to go to a synagogue and find that they were having a Muslim service. I wouldn't want to go to a mosque and run into a Baptist service. I don't want to go to a Baptist church and find out that they're having Mass. We've got to be honest to ourselves. We've got to be what we are. I'd rather a good old-fashioned honest agnostic than a phony Christian any day of the week. There are reluctant agnostics. There are atheists who are searching for God, and they may find him. But somebody who says they're doing something in the name of God, in the name of Christ, and God and Christ have nothing to do with it, is violating this commandment. I am the Lord your God. You shall not take my name in vain.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
EWTN Radio Classics is our 24/7 teaching and devotionals channel straight from the EWTN archives. Go classic with EWTN Radio Classics online at EWTNradio.net and on the EWTN app.
It's the Tuesday edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN. Look at this, one line open right now. If you want to snag it, if you have a question for Dr. David Anders, here is your opportunity. 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Marilyn very patiently waiting for us in Ann Arbor, Michigan, listening on Ave Maria Radio. Hey, Marilyn, what's on your mind today?
Well, thank you very much for taking my call. I appreciate your ministry so much. I cannot tell you how much I learn every day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a 10-year-old granddaughter who was baptized in a Presbyterian church. Her parents are divorced. She has been baptized but not catechized, and she's 10 years old. I have an excellent relationship with her, and I just need to know how. I don't even know if she has a concept of God. I took her to Mass with me recently, and she didn't ask any questions, and she just kind of, I don't want to say tolerated the whole thing, but it would have been an opportunity to introduce something, and I just didn't know where to go with it. And is there a book I can read or some direction that I can go in?
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. Are you familiar with the writer C.S. Lewis and the novels that he wrote for children called The Chronicles of Narnia?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm just shooting from the hip here because I don't know your granddaughter and I don't understand your relationship. You know that better than I do. So Lewis wrote those books to awaken the romantic imagination of children towards the transcendent, truth, goodness, and beauty, and then to orient them ultimately towards fulfillment in the Christian faith. Lewis was not a Catholic, but he had some pretty Catholic sensibilities and has been a bridge to many people, for many people, to Catholicism. And I'm thinking that someone who's 10 years old and does not yet have a fully developed discursive intellect with whom I could have philosophical conversations, story is an effective way into that domain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, you can discuss biblical stories. That's ideal, the story of Jesus being the most important. But depending on how open your granddaughter is, I mean, like biblical narrative is not written in the style of modern fiction. It's emotionally gripping always the first time through. That's preferable. But maybe if you're looking for a very kind of like low-stress, inoffensive way into that conversation, something like the Chronicles of Narnia might be an effective path. There's so many hints throughout those books that point directly to Jesus and directly to the transcendent. A grandmother kind of looking over your shoulder while you read it could at many points say, do you know why he said this? Do you know who Aslan represents in this text?
Yeah.
Why do you think he died, that Edmund could live? And that kind of thing. You can begin to seed some thoughts about, hey, these feelings and emotions and the sense of justice and nobility and the need for redemption, these kinds of things, those resonate deeply within me as I read this story. Do they correspond to anything real? And of course the Catholic answer, and Lewis's answer is yes. So I would say telling stories. Now, telling your own story is another one.
Mm-hmm.
All right, sharing the story of your own life and what your relationship to God has meant to you and your relationship to Jesus. And, I recently heard an address by that great Catholic evangelist Curtis Martin at our Eucharistic Congress here in Birmingham.
Yeah.
And he made the point that the lot of things that contribute to carrying on the faith from generation to generation, but none is more important. This is what the sociology shows, by the way. None is more important than discussions with our children about spiritual things. They don't have to take the form of a narrative, but they can very easily do so. So, talking to her is the most important thing, and that could take any form. And as she grows older, you may be able to have conversations that are a bit more intense about, current events and popular issues and questions of justice and society and man and woman. And, there's no end of things to talk about.
Get those gears turning in her young mind.
Sure.
Absolutely. And we do thank you for your call, Marilyn. It is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. If you call now, you can get in, 833-288-3986. Interesting question here from Richard, who's watching us on Facebook right now. What do you know about the Friends of the Ethical Humanist Society?
A bit. Not much, but a bit.
All right.
So my understanding is this organization it's a congregation of sorts. It's sort of like a church without God, right? It's a group of people who come together for the purpose of cultivating like sort of enlightenment, progressive ethical values of human dignity and rights and ethical concern and so forth, but on humanist terms without any explicit reference to God. And so the interesting thing about that, right, is that you would only find a society like that in a post-Christian, post-Enlightenment world. Right? You're not going to find the Friends of Ethical Humanism, running around in ancient China or Sri Lanka or sub-Saharan Africa or the Middle East or any place like that. And why? Because concepts like human rights and human dignity are Christian ideas. right? They only make sense, really, in the context of the Christian doctrine of the human person. If you are a materialist and an atheist, then it really doesn't make any sense to say that humans have dignity.
Mm-hmm.
Because humans aren't any different. They're just a little bit more complicated than rocks. We're all made out of the same stuff, fundamentally. There's nothing transcendent about the human person if you're an atheist. And so to say, well, humans have dignity, well, unless you ground that in some sort of metaphysical theory of the transcendent, of God or the absolute, then a statement like humans have dignity is just a sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
And I can come back and say, well, no, they don't. It reminds me of a famous epistolary exchange between one of the popes, I forget which one, and a descendant of Genghis Khan. The great Khan was ravaging the Catholic countries of Eastern Europe, and he was leading people off into slavery and raping women and burning villages to the ground and stealing cattle and all that good stuff that tyrants do, you know. And the Pope writes him a letter and says, why are you raping and pillaging and burning? What do these people ever do to you? And the Khan writes him back. It's amazing. I mean, you can go look this up. It's astonishing. He writes him back, and he basically says, I don't understand the question. They have stuff I want, and I'm the Khan. I have horses and spears and soldiers. I can do what I want. Like, the concept of human dignity to him made no sense, right? Yeah. And it doesn't outside the Christian worldview. And so in the Enlightenment of Western Europe in the 18th century, thinkers like Voltaire or Locke and Rousseau and company, they liked the Christian doctrines of human dignity and human rights, but they didn't like the whole metaphysical apparatus of the Catholic faith, popes and sacraments and saints and all. They didn't like all that. Yeah. So they said, let's try to keep the one and get rid of the other. And it didn't work. And ultimately it gave us Foucault in postmodernism.
I see. Let me ask you this then. Would this organization, Friends of the Ethical Humanist Society, would that be anything like Unitarians?
No, because Unitarianism does try to ground their ethical... Well, anything like, yeah, sure, it's anything like, all right, but it's not the same. It's similar in that they have this kind of progressive, humanistic value system, but at least Unitarianism tries to connect it vaguely to some notion of the spiritual or the transcendent.
Okay, and that's where we'll leave that. Right. Thank you so much for your question. We hope that's enlightening for you. Thanks for checking us out today on Facebook. It's Called to Communion here on EWTN. 833-288-EWTN is our number. You can get in right now. If you call now, 833-288-3986. London is listening in Norman, Oklahoma on Oklahoma Catholic Radio. Hey, London, what's on your mind today? London in Oklahoma, are you there? Why don't we put London on hold?
Sorry. Hello?
Oh, London, there you go. What's on your mind today, London?
Well, my mom married into a Catholic family, and now I am Catholic. But I used to be Baptist, and I took Holy Communion in the Baptist Church, and I was wondering if that would be considered a sin.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the question. So, in order for something to be a sin, you have to know that it's wrong when you do it. That's one of the great things about the Catholic faith. Like, we give a pass to people when they really don't know what they're doing.
That's right.
You're not God, and God is going to give you a pass too. If you don't know something's wrong, you can't really be fully responsible for your actions. Also, you have to do it freely. Like, if you act under compulsion, right, you're not responsible for your actions. For it really to be a sin, it's got to be wrong, you got to know it's wrong, and you got to be acting freely. And my suspicion is, in the situation you've described, you're calling me, right? So you didn't know what the right thing to do was.
Right.
And so, you get a pass. Now, was it the right thing to do? No, it was not the right thing to do, and you ought not to do it again. You ought not to do it again, because there's one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church that subsists fully in the Catholic Church, and that's where we go to meet Christ. We want to be joined to Christ in the church that he founded, and that's the Catholic Church. So we don't want to go receiving the putative sacraments of other ecclesial bodies. Nevertheless, you act in ignorance, and therefore you're blameless. So just don't do it again.
There you go. London, thank you for your call. That was a great call. It is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Hey, if you're looking for a unique setting for spiritual renewal, what a great time to get on the road and consider the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament right here in Alabama. You can visit the final resting place of Mother Angelica, and while you're in the area, tour the EWTN campus. It's only an hour away, a very easy drive, a very easy Interstate 65 drive, I might add. So start your Catholic pilgrimage today with EWTN. Call 205-271-2966. I'll give you that number again, 205-271-2966, or you can go to EWTN.com/pilgrimage, EWTN.com/pilgrimage. Now, our phone number here at the radio station is 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-3986. Patrick is listening in Indianapolis on Catholic Radio Indy. He's a first-time caller. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on.
Sure.
I was just discussing with a colleague of mine. We were looking to better understand the truths or the half-truths associated around the time of the Reformation about indulgence-related money actually going to fund St. Peter's Basilica.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the question. So I want to draw a couple distinctions here. And first of all, for the sake of our listeners, I'd like to explain what indulgences are and why they're a great and wonderful thing, and we ought to celebrate them. I just got one this weekend, actually. I was pretty well. Actually, I guess I still have to go to confession to get that.
You do,
right?
You do.
It hadn't quite taken yet, but I'm excited about that possibility. Catholic understanding of salvation is that we grow progressively in holiness and become more and more like Jesus. And as we acquire the likeness of Christ, our deeds, our actions are meritorious, and they merit reward from God, and the ultimate reward is heaven, right? But when we sin, we also demerit, and we can be forgiven of our sins, reconciled to God, but we still owe God a debt of reparation. Just like a husband who offends his wife, she may forgive him, but he still ought to come with the box of chocolates and the flowers to make reparation, not as a condition of their reconciliation, but as an important part of his making amends for what he did wrong. And the same thing pertains in the Christian life and our relationship with God. Sometimes the burden of making reparation is pretty great, is a pretty big burden. And the Church, because it dispenses the merits and treasures of the Church, the merits of the saints, can bring the good works and the reparations of one Catholic to bear on the spiritual life of another. We all share spiritual goods. It's part of the communion of saints. And that even endures after death, right? And so an indulgence is nothing more than our older brothers in the faith, the saints, coming alongside and cooperating with us in making reparation to God for the debts that we owe him in the order of justice. That's all an indulgence is. And the Church disposes of that, right? Because it's their job. The Church has jurisdiction to make that distribution of divine merit, of a human merit, supernatural merit. And because the Church can dispose it, she can attach conditions, and rightly should do so, for people receiving those benefits of indulgences. And usually the conditions are some good work, like a prayer. For example, you say this prayer, make this pilgrimage. This weekend, Tom and I both had the opportunity to gain a plenary indulgence by attending a Eucharistic Congress, big meeting of Catholics in celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Diocese of Birmingham. Oh, so all good things. And the Church asks us to do good things because they're good for us. They're good for us. One of the good things you can do is give alms. It's a good thing. Giving alms is a good thing. Jesus says if you give money in secret to one of these, your Father, give alms in secret, your Father who sees you in secret will reward you. And you can give alms to the Church, too. That's a noble thing to do. Like, sure. We have institutes in my diocese, like schools that primarily serve the poor, for example. And they can't fund themselves. No possible way, because kids can't pay tuition. So Catholics come alongside. They give alms. They give alms in the form of writing a check, to St. Barnabas Catholic School or Holy Family Cristo Rey Catholic School in Birmingham. Two great places to send your money, by the way. And they're giving alms. And they're giving it to an institution, and sometimes it's to build buildings. It is. Cristo Rey's building a new building right now.
I know.
They need some help.
Yeah.
All right, send them a check. That's good. That's meritorious. God will reward you for doing that if you don't do it to be seen by men. So why can't the church attach an indulgence to a practice like that? That's the logic. Now, there's a practical reason why the church shouldn't. Practical, not a theological reason, but a practical reason. The practical reason is it lends itself ridiculously to abuse. That's why, all right? Because greedy and immoral churchmen would start issuing indulgences for, like, giving alms for the bishop's new Mercedes.
Not
right?
good.
Not good. And such things have happened in the history of the church.
Yeah.
And did it happen in the construction of St. Peter's? You bet. Absolutely it did. It's a historical fact that indulgences were sold in Europe for the construction of St. Peter's Basilica as alms. All right? Now, was that a good idea? Obviously not. And it is no longer permitted to collect alms from penitents in exchange for indulgences. That's no longer a legitimate practice in the Catholic Church because it lends itself to abuse. More interesting question is this. Did those who participate actually acquire an indulgence? Potentially, yes. So just because a churchman is corrupt doesn't mean that the individuals who were exploited didn't reap some spiritual benefit that God permits. And like the same thing is true of sacraments celebrated by immoral priests. An immoral priest can validly confer sacraments that give grace. But he can do it in a way that causes offense and drives people away from God. And yet God can still work through that.
Beautiful thing. Patrick, thank you so much for your call. Call to communion here on EWTN. Lynn is checking us out today on Facebook. Lynn says, could you please help me understand the whole necessity of sacrifice to God and how it is similar to and yet different from the pagan sacrifices to their gods, small g?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. What a great question.
Yeah.
So to offer sacrifice is the principal act of the virtue of religion and the way we demonstrate love in human relationships. Imagine if I said to my wife, I love you, and she said, great, will you take out the garbage? And I said, not on your life. I mean, how much would my love be worth, right?
How much?
Love, good priest friend of mine says, sacrifice is the language of love. It's the language of love. If I'm not willing to give something up for my beloved, I probably don't really love. That's right and good and just. Now, does God need our sacrifices? Does he gain anything? But absolutely not. Absolutely. God gains nothing by my act of sacrifice. Why then does he command it? Because it's good for me. It's good for me to so order my life that I make the highest good the highest good.
Sure.
And for me to properly integrate my own personality requires me to make sacrifices. Am I going to read Scripture or play Nintendo? I'll have to sacrifice the one for the other. And if I make the greatest good, then I will reap the benefits. And our spiritual act of worship, St. Paul says, Romans chapter 12, is the sacrifice, the offering of our very selves, our very lives, to the highest good, which is God. So that's the order of real sacrifice. Now, the sacrifice of pagans was generally the immolation of animals to pacify bloodthirsty and arbitrary deities, not so that the pagans involved could properly integrate and orient their interior lives, making the highest thing the highest thing. Now, so that's why pagan sacrifices are. Sometimes they performed horrible acts of abomination, like the sacrifice of humans. And this is rampant in the ancient world. Aztecs did it. Ancient Chinese did it. The Celts did it. You find human sacrifice all over the world. And the Hebrew prophets stood wholesale against this abomination, said this is terrible. It's on account of that God wiped out the Canaanites, in fact, right? Sent in the people of Israel. Terrible stuff, human sacrifice. Terrible stuff. Now, I want to throw one qualification out there. Cardinal Charles Journet, Catholic theologian, great Catholic thinker, all right, has a book on the doctrine of grace in Catholic theology. And it's actually available in the document library of EWTN. So that's, for me, that's like a good enough imprimatur right now, you know? Okay, it's good stuff. And in Journet's work on the doctrine of grace, he, as a sort of speculative possibility, looks into the question of what he calls uncovenanted graces, graces that God might extend outside the formal structures of Catholic faith and sacraments. And Cardinal Journet speculates, could it be the case that there might be a pagan someplace who makes a just sacrifice to the one true God, not these sorts of superstitious sacrifices, human sacrifice, or the placate irascible and arbitrary deities and so forth, and fertility cults, not that sort of thing, but the genuine desire to be reconciled to the one true God whom I cannot see. And of course that's got to be an intellectual possibility, because the likes of Abraham performed these sorts of sacrifices before he had much in the way of explicit revelation, right? Just the knowledge that there is such a God who is due sacrifice. So it's possible, not likely, but it's possible. And so before I point like absolutely irreconcilably to some human being and say, I understand what you're doing and it's necessarily and always wrong, might be a good idea to ask the guy what he intends by that action. And that's the way Cardinal Journet went about it.
Very good. And we do thank you for checking us out today on Facebook. Here's a question now from Ian. Why is it that non-Catholics cannot receive the Holy Eucharist? Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's not safe for them. It's dangerous. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Because for multiple reasons. One is that reception of Holy Communion is the act whereby we demonstrate our union with the body of Christ, which is the Catholic Church, and profess, in our performative action, that we believe this is the body of Christ, the Church, established by Jesus as the sign and instrument of reconciliation of the whole world, and that it contains the whole truth, and I have to surrender my intellect and will to its authority completely, right? If you don't believe that, then don't sign the document.
Yeah.
Don't pledge allegiance to a foreign power to whom you do not owe allegiance, to whom you've made no pledge of loyalty. All right, you're lying. If you do, you're lying with your actions, and to lie is not safe. It's spiritually dangerous. Right. The Eucharist is also a thing most holy, and even Catholics can't safely receive Holy Communion unless they're properly disposed and in the state of grace. St. Paul says to do so, you actually risk physical death. So non-Catholics, the Catholic Church can make no judgment about whether they're properly disposed. No judgment at all. Right? The Church has no jurisdiction over non-Catholics.
Right.
But over her own members, she does. It's called the confessional. Right? In the confessional, priest says, I absolve you. You're cleared. Off you go to communion.
Yeah.
Right? Non-Catholics don't have access to that. Priests can't judge them absolved. Can't absolve them, in fact. And so they're not safe. They're not cleared for landing. Yeah. It's not safe for non-Catholics to receive Holy Communion.
And I would guess that most non-Catholics who are asking a question like that would have never dreamed that there would be an answer like, it's not safe.
It's also not safe for Catholics. Because imagine if you're a Catholic and in comes, the head of the local, I don't know, street gang who's, committing all kinds of horrible things in public, and you know that he is. And he just casually walks up and receives communion. Well, all the Catholics in the room are going to think, well, maybe I can go get me a street gang and start beating people up. That's okay.
Yeah, wow. Hey, Dr. David Anders, a fast-moving hour. Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Tom.
We do the program Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern here on EWTN Radio, with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern. We also bring you the best of the week on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern, and a podcast for you anytime you want, 24/7 at EWTNradio.net. On behalf of Charles, Ryan, and Jeff, I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders. Thanks so much for joining us here on EWTN's Call to Communion. God bless.